You're listening to a special podcast of all things ADHD in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Hi, I'm your host, Susan Booning, and I'm here today with Dr. Ari Tuckman. Dr. Tuckman, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a psychologist. I'm in the Philly suburbs, and I've been specializing in ADHD for 20 years now or something. I've served with CHAD in a number of different ways, including on the national board. I've done a couple support groups in the local chapters, and I'm now currently the conference co-chair. So good stuff.
So we're certainly in a time of uncertainty right now. And we're dealing right now with the coronavirus outbreak. But let's face it, we've had a lot of uncertain times for a while now, and there may be more to come. So what are some of the issues that your clients are dealing with that are generated by the crisis?
Yeah, I think so first of all, you're right. Like coronavirus is new and the specifics of the situation we're in are new. But what is definitely not new is times of uncertainty. And sometimes it's times of uncertainty for an individual or a family. Sometimes it's times of uncertainty for all of society as it is now. I think that is important to keep in mind because this is not just about right now in this moment. These are things that will serve you well beyond. And, I think my first thought on this is different people cope with uncertainty in different ways. Some of that, maybe in general, we can make some kind of sweeping generalizations, might not apply to everybody, but sometimes folks who tend to be more anxious will tend to sort of dive in to the material and absorb themselves into it and check every news feed and every tweet and every whatever, because that helps them feel like the uncertainty is a bit more certain, that if I can read the right blog or the right article or hear the right segment on whatever news channel, then I will feel more secure. And it sort of makes sense. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it only increases your uncertainty. So, the diving in is one approach. For other people, it may go the other way. They may feel like, what? I don't want to know more. Like the more I learn, the more anxious I feel. So I'm going to kind of tune it out. And you may find that you vacillate between those two. If you have a partner, if you're in a family, to recognize the fact that different people will respond in different ways. No way is better or worse, but we need to manage this together, especially when we're sort of, on house arrest, so to speak, and we're all on top of each other, next to each other all the time.
How are you delivering therapy services during this time? Are you using online therapy, telehealth? Do you think it's an effective way to do therapy?
It is. And I'm doing it. I'm doing video sessions, or sometimes we, default down to phone sessions. It's not a new thing. I have had folks where I've done it in the past. So like a college student who lives like this is their hometown, but then they go out of the area to go to school, or other people who for some reason aren't able to get into the office. But it's really become it's being used much more now, both by therapists, which certainly makes sense. But frankly, even I hear from clients that some of their like the general practitioners or whoever are also doing phone sessions. So unless it's a situation where your doctor or the nurse or the practitioner or whatever needs to actually put hands on you or to get a reading or whatever, they'll just do the session, the appointment by phone, because it just reduces the risk to everybody. Like, why go in if you don't have to? And, to the credit of various kind of regulatory bodies from like the licensing boards and the insurance companies and everybody, they're loosening up some of the prior restrictions, particularly in the face of the current situation, so that encourage the use of video sessions. So, if you're a family, if you're at home, if you're struggling more, feel free to check in and see if your healthcare providers will do video sessions. I've had a number of new people that I've seen, who I never met in person, and, just in the last some days have contacted me about doing it. I think it works well in this time of social distancing. I think it's a very smart move.
So, for those people who are cooped up together at home now for long periods of time, what tips and strategies can you provide to them to maintain good relationships or deal with the relationships they presently have?
It's an interesting kind of social experiment that nobody asked to be a part of. That, it really is a double-edged sword because on the one hand, it's kind of great that we get to spend so much more time with each other and, we don't have to fight traffic and all the rest of it. So that's a good thing. But, the harder part is there's all this uncertainty and the what are we doing and, how do we make this online schooling work if you have kids who are now doing that for the first time, or the financial stress if you're one of the millions of families who has someone who is suddenly not earning an income because they can't work from home. My advice is, first of all, to just accept the fact that this is a strange time. Now, accept it doesn't mean love it. It just means acknowledge, like, yeah, this is what it is. There's a lot here that I can't change. There's a lot here I wish was different. But there are some things that I can do something about. So let's focus in on those. To have some conversation between romantic partners, if you have kids, to then also have a second conversation with the kids of like, let's talk about what the new deal is. It's just talking to a friend and colleague yesterday about, he was talking to his kids and he's like, this is not summer break. Like, this is not, let's all lay around and just do fun stuff. Like, you still have school right now. There are still things that need to be done. Right. So it's to get everybody a little bit more on the same page to talk about, where are the places that we can be flexible. So do we have to stick to the same bedtimes and wake ups or not? In my house, the answer is no, we don't. I mean, not like we can't sleep till noon, or we're not waking up at 6. There's no school bus we're catching. That's kind of cool. We're all loving that. But then there are some other things that are different, and to really kind of set the expectations. And then almost certainly have more conversations because whatever you think is going to happen is probably going to evolve a little bit, where it's going to change. Or, especially if you have kids doing online school, I don't think the teachers know yet what they're doing because how could they? And the kids don't know what they're doing because how could they either? So, we're all sort of figuring this out as we go along. And we're all trying to figure out how long this is even going to be. Like, we don't know the answer to that yet.
Those are some really good tips, but are there any specific behaviors needed to deal with relationships during this time that you can give?
One of the things I would recommend is to have some conversation with your partner about time together and time alone, because they're both important. I mean, there's that old hardness makes it, or distance makes the heart grow fonder, right? And it does, but that's hard to come by when you're all piled on top of each other. So to have some specific conversations about what kind of alone time do each of us need. For those of us who tend to get restless, let's talk about what our exercise options are. Like, how do we get out some of that restlessness? And if you're crammed into a tiny apartment in New York City, that's going to be one sort of a situation. If you're, living somewhere where you have a yard or you have some ability to get to a park or some outdoor thing, that's another option. If you've got some decent exercise equipment in the basement, for example, that's another option. But to really kind of talk it through, because I do think that, I mean, I'm always a proponent of exercise, regardless of the circumstances, but maybe especially now, and especially if you're one of those restless, cooped up people, like you'll really benefit. So to have some specific conversations about how do we facilitate that? How do we make it happen? Because you're going to be in a better mood if you exercise, and I'm going to like being around you more if you exercise, and vice versa.
Can you give me some examples of that kind of conversation?
It's a bit of brass tacks. Like, let's really talk about this. Like, what does the schedule look like? And I know that often, our folks with ADHD don't like planning a lot. Um, Partially because it's kind of boring, partially because it feels like a prison, like, ugh, what if I don't want to do that thing at that time? Or it feels like a setup for trouble of like, great, we're going to set a schedule. Here we go again, me not hitting the schedule. To talk about the schedule, to really think about what are the things that really do matter and where are the things where we can be flexible. And I think that, and this is totally stereotypical, but often the non ADHD partner tends to be, let's just say, more about schedules It's easy in these anxious times to respond by really trying to lock everything down. From 8 to 8:15 we'll do this, from 8:16 to 8:31 we'll do this. And it's not wrong, but the two of you or the three or the six or the whatever need to figure out, how do we make this work for everybody? So to really kind of have some good conversations about it, to really work on being in a good mood and keeping yourself in a good mood. And sometimes that means letting the other person's bad mood roll by without getting tangled up in it and responding in kind.
So I'd like to jump back to adults in a minute, but first, I know that you also work with teenagers.
Hmm.
Hearing and reading a lot of questions and concerns about teenagers during this time. And, so much of teen life is social and so on. And is there anything you can tell us specifically about teenagers?
I mean, this is definitely affecting all of us, but I think especially for our teenagers who get a lot of their social time at school or through their activities of like the play or soccer or whatever. Now all of a sudden that's all ripped away, and frankly with rather uncertain futures for the remainder of the school year. So some of this I think is to just, I don't know, like it's sort of mourning the loss, kind of acknowledging the fact that there are a lot of activities and rituals that will not take place. So the school play that they work so hard on will never happen, or the prom or graduation, or you know finishing up senior year together. So to have some conversation to really acknowledge that, yeah, that does suck and it's totally unfair and it's terrible and it's all of those things. And then also at a certain point, we need to kind of move on and not be miserable. Talk to your teenagers about like how do you stay connected to your friends? I know it's not the same, but how do you stay connected to your friends? I mean, they're good at tech, so like they can set up like FaceTime chats and stuff like that. And I don't know. I mean, for myself, it's been a long time since I was a teenager, but I've been texting with some friends from high school. I've been texting with some friends from college. We're actually going to do like a Zoom meetup with a bunch of my college friends on Sunday night. Like, we never ever do that. Like, we just don't, because everyone's crazy busy and whatever. And now we have the time. So, like, let's take advantage of the opportunity. So, like, same thing with your teenagers. What are some things that now we can do? And I know, the stereotype is teenagers are surly and they don't want to hang out with their parents, and that's sometimes true, but it's not always true. Like that's a little bit of an overstatement. So, what are some things that we all can do as a family here that actually are fun?
So you've written some books for adults with ADHD. Can you talk about a few of the messages that you think are most important for adults with ADHD at this point?
I think the thing is, especially in this strange time, to recognize the fact that romantic partners are always going to be different from each other. Like, obviously, there's some similarities, there's enough similarities, but there's always going to be different. Whether one person has ADHD and one person doesn't, whether both have, whether neither has, whether it's a heterosexual couple, a same sex couple, a whatever couple, like, there's always going to be differences. All this time together can really magnify those differences, but I think it's also a time to try to appreciate some of those differences and to really make a point of having conversation about, how do we get some time together here as well. One of the things so my newest book, ADHD After Dark, where I look at couples with one ADHD partner and one without, one of the biggest barriers, or kind of the cluster of the biggest barriers to a better sex life, had to do with not having enough time or energy for sex. And this is kind of like, it's a little bit of a hidden blessing, maybe. If we can not be completely frustrated with each other all day, then maybe it means we get into bed a little bit earlier, which might also, by the way, mean that we got to get the kids into bed a little bit earlier if you got them. Take advantage of this time. And that means working well together during the day, so that when it comes to night, you're actually going to want to spend that extra time together. And, maybe something sexual happens, or maybe it doesn't, like, whatever. Like, the important thing is that you make a point of spending some good time together and to feel more connected again, because soon enough, this is all going to be done and we're all going to be back to running a million miles an hour in 100 different directions. Like there will indeed come a time where we look back and miss this time together, even if we don't miss the angst thing that was associated with it.
And of course, there are some couples in the present circumstances who are not sheltering in place together for reasons of jobs. Do you have any suggestions for them for getting through this time?
Yeah. So, these are folks who already had a stress, and now this is adding yet another stress. So, you know, stress, it's an interesting thing when it comes to stress in relationships, because sometimes it pushes us closer together, and sometimes it exacerbates existing kind of, splits and divisions and weaknesses between us. It kind of pushes us further apart. So, if you're not physically together, to then, really make a point of figuring out how to otherwise be together, whether it means just checking in, with a couple quick texts during the day or phone calls or video chats or whatever. But, to talk about how to make that a priority and talk about what each of you needs and, when are the good times. So just as one example, I was talking to a college kid yesterday whose girlfriend is now working from home. And because some of her coworkers, unfortunately, were laid off, she's even busier than before. So it was hard before for them to be in contact during the day. And now it's even worse, except now she's, on the other side of the country. So to have some direct conversations about expectations, to try to prioritize that time, but also to know when not to take it personally if your partner isn't available during certain times.
Do you have any suggestions for adults with ADHD finding themselves working from home, maybe for the first time? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, and this is a new reality. And it's, so there's your standard working from home challenges. And then we have I've never done this before, and now we're jerry rigging my old job into this new situation. So that's a wrinkle. And usually when we talk about working from home, we don't talk about having all of your family all around you also, right? So that's like a whole nother wrinkle as well. And the challenge of it is just it's the distractibility, as well as just of having people there. But it's also, depending on what your physical layout is, like it may be really hard to get some space apart where you actually have like a designated workplace where you're not on top of each other or you're not overhearing each other. So you can create some, I don't know, auditory distance, is that a word? By maybe put on music if that's a thing that helps, or alternatively just putting on kind of like either white noise, so there's like the staticky, stuff that, like, for example, at a therapist's office, they might have those outside the doors, or, other stuff like crashing waves or cricket sounds or whatever, either through your speakers or through earphones. So it blocks out hearing the other rustling around in the background, but to really sort of think about how do I set up a good work environment, and then to have some conversations with your family about it. And, here's what I need, this is what works best, rather than getting frustrated and then kind of snapping. Like that's never the best way. And there's other stuff like, I mean, this is kind of a weird thing, but like, what are we doing with the pets? I'm sitting in my the office slash guest room here in our house. My wife is in our bedroom, but like, we have a dog and two cats, and like, half the time they're scratching at the door to go one way or the other. So I'm in the middle of session, and there's somebody scratching it. You can ignore it a couple times, but then it's like, ugh, they want to come in. So like that's kind of a new thing. Like never had to deal with that at the office. So these are the conversations to have, and then to keep having as it all evolves and you figure out what's going on.
And also, support groups. A lot of people have been attending support groups, whether it's specifically to deal with ADHD. I know Alcoholics Anonymous, for the first time in its history, is offering its meetings via Zoom or other platforms. And I can imagine for a lot of folks, this is really a challenge. how do you preserve the anonymity of the other people in your meeting when you're in a house with all your family?
Right.
And and yet those kinds of support groups are so vital for so many people.
So, like I was supposed to present for the outside of Philly here, the Bucksmont, so Bucks County, Montgomery County, Chad chapter in April. And like, let's all be clear, that ain't happening, not in person. And even if we wanted to, the hospital that hosts them wouldn't let it anyway. So we had some conversation among some of the local Chad chapters of switching to Zoom meeting. And I think the thing there is to not get caught up on how it's different or not as good as, because it's easy to compare, and instead to focus on, okay, well, I will get from this what I can. And there may be some aspects of it that you find are actually better than the in-person meetings. And, then there are parts that you don't like as much. But I think that in-person contact is really important, So like on the conference committee, we've had a lot of conversations about this because there's so much available online, including like this thing we're doing right now. But so much of what people get out of the conference is that showing up in person. It's seeing people in the hallway, and it's talking to the exhibitors, and it's talking to that person who sits down next to you as you wait for the next session to start. So, like that personal contact is really important. And, I think whether it's Chad meetings, whether it's AA meetings, whatever, to make a point of showing up for them, because it's still kind of better than nothing.
So is there anything else that you'd like to talk with our audience about today?
Hey, the big advice that I would give is these are indeed uncertain times, in that we do not know. It is unknowable as of this moment exactly how this will all progress, because it is evolving as it goes. And how it all shakes out, this depends on how we respond. And our response is evolving. So therefore the outcome is evolving even more. So be smart, do the things that you can do, and then for the rest, wait and see. And I know that's easy to say and it's much harder to do, but to sort of focus on what are the opportunities presented by these strange circumstances, rather than fretting and being angry or anxious over the things that are not. And again, I know that's easy to say, but there are some benefits that we're getting from it. So don't wait until we all return back to normal life and are crazy and busy and whatever before you go, darn it, that was actually kind of cool. I wish I had taken better advantage of it. Really take advantage of it. We didn't touch on the question of whether you should keep taking your meds during this time, assuming it's like a stimulant for ADHD, like things like antidepressants, you don't just stop those. But maybe the answer is no, but maybe the answer is actually more so, in these weird, unstructured, slightly chaotic times, you might actually find all the more benefit of taking the medication. Whereas the parent who maybe doesn't see their kid at school all day, who obviously certainly doesn't see your kid at school all day, might be really informative actually for you to see how your kid does on their meds, or how they're not doing. So there might be some incidental benefits that come from this. So kind of be a little bit on the lookout about for it, which again is not to minimize some of the significant suffering that is going on now, but to also to balance that out with, what are the potential benefits of this unasked for situation.
Thank you so very much for your time today.
Well, it is my pleasure. This made my day a little bit better as well. So I hope it makes the listeners' day a little bit better.
Thank you.
In this time of crisis, we know everyone in our community is facing tremendous pressures, and CHAD and its National Resource Center on ADHD are here to help. We are committed to continuing to be the resource on which you can rely. For more information, visit our website at chad.org and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Pinterest.